Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. In this week's podcast, I have Tidbits. I have some questions for you guys. I have a new work in progress. I have an update on a repair in progress. And finally, I'm going to give you a complete tour of my office here, which I've been working on really hard in the past few weeks in order to add sewing and spinning to this office space. So let's get started. This first tidbit came to me from a text message from my husband. He's like, oh, I'm sure you've seen this already, but I'm going to give you this link anyway. And I hadn't seen it. In fact, it was fascinating. So it's actually a part 4A of a 4-part series on textile production in the pre-modern age. So I have not read the first 3 parts yet, but the way that they describe them is that this entire series is about the production of textiles in the pre-modern world, and that they started off with things like spinning and weaving and things like that. And they were mostly talking about household goods, so things that people would make in their homes for their own use. And what this particular part was talking about was things like dyeing and fulling. So these are specialized skills that would be done outside of the household. So it's a really fascinating article, and I'm looking forward to going back and reading the first 3 parts, which I have not seen yet. But I'll leave that link down below, as well as links to everything else I'm talking about in the tidbits. This next tidbit came to me from the Fleece and Fashion Twitter feed. They are out of the University of Glasgow, and they often post images from different museums. And this particular painting is from the Government Art Collection. It was painted by Frances Grant. It was painted probably between 1850 and 1855. And the woman in the portrait is Mary Isabella Grant. I presume that's his wife. And they say that she died in 1854. So she died soon after, I guess, he finished the portrait. And it's titled Knitting a Shawl, and you can see what it is that she's knitting. But what Fleece to Fashion found really intriguing was the little basket hanging from her wrist that you could tell the ball of yarn was contained inside of that. Now, I've certainly seen pouches or things like that knitters use, but they were wondering if anybody had seen specifically a basket like that, or if they had used it even. But it's an interesting painting. I'll leave a link to the painting as well as to the Fleece to Fashion Twitter feed. They're also on Instagram. They post at least one thing every day that's related to textiles, specifically wool-related things. So it can be a really interesting way of sort of expanding your horizons in terms of art and museum collections. This next tidbit also came from Fleece to Fashion's Twitter feed. It's an image of an item that's held at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's described as a carpet. It's really meant to be a wall hanging type of thing. And it was a piece of knitting that was done by someone as part of becoming a master hand knitter. Like, this was their masterpiece work. And it was for the Guild in Strasbourg. And what they mention is that they would have had to make a hat, gloves with individual fingers, some type of knitted shirt, and then they would have had to do this big sort of carpet type of thing. And so they were wondering, you know, how do you suppose that this particular carpet was made? And some people were speculating about stranded color work or intarsia, or maybe it was done in the round and then steeked. And the thing is, you can't tell by looking at an image like this. You can't even tell by looking at the front of the work. You'd have to be able to look at the back and look at the edges. But then the next question is whether it was actually hand knitted, because that is not known. So frame knitting was definitely something that was known by then, and that in fact was part of what drove the Industrial Revolution, was frame knitting. And so especially these extremely fine gauge, very large pieces that would end up flat were often done on a knitting frame, but you can't tell necessarily by looking at it. And to me, I thought the items were very interesting, that those were the things that they would have to submit. Now, I would be interested in seeing the other 3 items and what those looked like, to be able to see what sorts of skills that they were expected to show that they had mastered. So to knit a hat that was fulled and end up being the correct size would be a very important skill. And secondly, being able to knit at very small circumferences at fine gauges, and being able to make fingers and have something fit somebody, that would be very important. And then this idea of a knitted shirt, it's not clear what kind of knitted shirt that might be. See if it was something that was cut and sewn, or if it was something that was fully fashioned to fit the recipient. These are all things that I don't know. To produce something that was very large and had these beautiful scenes in them, to me would indicate that perhaps frame knitting was also a skill that they would be expected to be an expert at, in order to be able to create these types of things, because these were knitters who were creating things for wealthy people. They weren't people who were knitting socks for their kids at home on the farm, and it was a very different kind of knitting. As somebody who is a master knitter in current times, and knowing what we had to go through in order to show our expertise, I find this really fascinating, and only brings up more questions for me. So last week, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been 2 weeks ago, but I think it was last week, I told you guys about Clara Parks launching a new website called the Wool Channel. And there are different levels that you could participate on the Wool Channel. One is to just subscribe to a weekly newsletter. Another would be to have a subscription where you could get access to the community and really take a deep dive into learning more about wool and its different qualities. Well, the first newsletter that I got from her, she talked about a shoe company called Allbirds, that she had bought a pair of shoes from them a few years ago, and they were wool shoes, wool sneakers. And she was saying that they have moved on to also doing making sneakers out of other sorts of natural products. But I was intrigued by the idea of the wool shoes and wool sneakers, and I thought I would order a pair, and they came today. Let me see if I can show them to you. I'm bendy, so this is what they look like. They're wool, and they're machine washable, so you can throw them in the wash, and they're super comfortable. I'm not wearing socks with them. Because I wanted to see wool breathes. My feet usually don't smell when I'm wearing knitted wool socks, and so my assumption is they aren't going to smell with these either. They come in different colors of gray for the uppers, and then the soles come in different. These are a light gray, but they come in white, and I think a dark color as well. I've been wearing them all afternoon. I really like them. As I said, they're really comfortable. I don't feel like I need to break them in. So I will leave a link down below in case that's something you guys are interested in. And again, they are making sneakers out of all sorts of natural, like plant fibers, as well as wool. So a year ago, when I was knitting my vintage 1920s pattern as part of my long-range project to knit a sweater from each decade of the 20th century, one of the things that I was puzzled about was the yarn that was called for in the pattern. So it was from a booklet, a Corticelli booklet. I'll leave a link below because you can see it online. You can look at all the patterns in that booklet. You can read the booklet and see what they're saying about the yarns and things too. But many of the sweaters in that booklet called for a yarn called Shetland Floss. And it wasn't specific to the Corticelli yarn company. Every yarn company had a Shetland Floss. And the written descriptions of what it was were not that easy to really understand. in that pattern book, the Shetland floss is sometimes used with one strand or sometimes two strands held together. And in some sweaters, you would be using a strand of one strand of a particular color. And then as you transition to the other color, they might have you hold one of each color together as you knit it. And then you would just work in the second color. And with no change of needle size or gauge, the gauge difference was not noted, that there would be a gauge difference. And I got very curious about what the Shetland floss was because it was so common. Like as far back as I could find any advertisements about yarns being sold, like in the 1880s, they were always listing Shetland floss as possibility. And then up until about the 1950s, maybe early 60s, I could find advertisements for Shetland floss from different yarn companies. So it seemed like it was a ubiquitous yarn. People knew what it was. They used it all the time. Every yarn company had it, and nobody knew what it was now. I even contacted the Shetland Museum last year to see if they knew what it was. I contacted one of the Shetland yarn companies, never heard back from them to see if they had any idea what it was and what a modern equivalent would be. But I was able to, at the time, buy some Shetland floss, some vintage Shetland floss on eBay. And recently in my Ravelry group, somebody asked me if I had ever, figured out really what Shetland floss was. I don't know if she remembered that I did buy some, but she had uncovered a few skeins in her stash and offered to send it to me, or she thought maybe the Shetland Museum, who hadn't known what it was, might like it. And I said, no, I had bought some. And then I just on a whim, I went on eBay and found some more. And so I ordered it and I received it. And so I want to just kind of show you guys what Shetland floss was, particularly if you ever want to do any vintage knitting from the first half of the 20th century when it was so common, so that you can get an idea of what that yarn was like, which could really help you find an appropriate substitute. Because the thing is about this particular yarn is it could be used in a wide range of gauges. And that is one clue about what kind of yarn might be suitable nowadays. This is the yarn that I originally bought. I got several skeins of it, and I wasn't buying it for the color. I was just buying it for the information. So this was, I don't have the label for it anymore, but it was a company called Dawn, D-A-W-N, which was a subsidiary of the American Thread Company, I believe. So the way that Shetland floss is frequently described as that it's a two-ply, like hairy yarn, and then they'll say it's suitable for babies and shawls and things like that. The way Corticelli described their flossola was that it was for high-class, medium-weight sweaters, but also for scarves and shawls. And they said it was the same as imported Shetland floss. It is kind of hairy, but it's not scratchy. I mean, it's not merino. But if you've ever used other kinds of Shetland wool yarns where they don't really feel scratchy, but they don't feel super soft, and then when you wash them, they soften up. So you can see that there's two plies here. And I would say that this is probably a woolen spun yarn. You know, it's differentiated in the literature between Shetland floss and like Shetland wools. They'll advertise them as separate things. So it's really hard to know what the difference is, but you can see how it's kind of just really fuzzy and you don't really see the defined strands of fibers in here. So this one is from a company, it's a super knit Shetland floss, 50 grams. But this looks very 1940s to me, maybe 50s. But it's British made by someplace in Leicester, England. And it's a sole distributor for Switzerland. So it's not clear really what year this was from, if somebody knows, if somebody recognizes this. But to spell gram this way, and the fact that it was in grams, but it was made in England, where I think, they were using ounces until late in the 60s, but they're distributing for Switzerland. Maybe Switzerland was using the metric system already. I really don't know. So I really don't know how old this particular yarn is. But you can see that this is, very similar. So this is a Shetland floss from the UK, and this is one from the US, and they do look very similar. You know what I should do is I should knit up a swatch of each, and then a before and after, and then wash them and see how they might change from that process. But it's an accurate description to say it's a hairy two-ply, but it doesn't really inform you, at least not visually in my head, what that would actually mean. So this is what the Shetland floss looks like. I have been in this reorganization frenzy in the past couple of weeks, and which has meant that I've just put my vintage sweater to the side. I was struggling with some gauge issues and I needed a time out from it, but I was really missing knitting something. And so I turned to my mindless knit, which is to knit a sock. I recently sent my brother a pair of socks I knit for him. I think it was last May, but I didn't send them to him until recently. And he said, oh, they're a perfect fit. And he mentioned that some of the socks I'd knit him previously, he can still get them on, but maybe they'd shrunk and felted a little bit. The new ones I sent him that he said fit him perfectly were made from Regia, and I don't expect those to shrink or felt. Regia has a 10-year guarantee on their sock yarn, and I have found that's well deserved. That those socks they just hold up. I love the colors. They constantly come up with great new striping patterns. And so my brother is a very big guy. He's 6'3". He's got really big feet. And so I like to knit him yarn with Regia's 6-ply yarn. So it's a little bit thicker. So I usually end up knitting the same number of stitches for him that I'd be knitting for me. But I can end up with a bigger sock because it's a little bit thicker yarn. So this is the yarn right here. I'll put what color it is on the screen here because I don't remember. But it's a pretty short repeat. It has, some blue and some of the fake Fair Isle stuff and just some stripes. Unfortunately, the last pair of socks I knit for him with this yarn, I didn't indicate what needle size I used. And usually I do that when I'm starting a project. I put in all of that information about the yarn and who it's for and what day I started and all kinds of information. It could be that I was trying to figure out what needle size to use because there are a lot of different brands of sock yarn that have a 6-ply, and I don't always end up using the same needle or get the same gauge with those. And so I often do have to experiment when working with when working with sock yarns because I'm knitting at a firmer gauge than what's on the label, and when you try to squish stitches in, it's a little harder to predict, at least it is for me, exactly what needle size I'm going to need when I'm doing that. I started the sock off thinking, oh, I must have used this needle size, and as I was knitting it, I'm like, no, this is a little firmer than I'd planned, and so I changed needle size. I could have changed stitch count, but for some reason I didn't think of doing that. So I knit about this much already, and then I ripped it out and had to start over. So this is what I've been working on right now as I've been reorganizing and I'm exhausted at the end of the day, or I'm just in the morning and trying to get myself going. I can just pick up and work on this for a little bit and not have to think about it at all. So another thing I've been talking about doing recently has been to repair a really favorite, beloved Aran sweater that I knit about 15 years ago. The challenge was because it was 15 years old, I didn't have any of the yarn, and I went and looked through all of my leftovers. I have a lot of red leftovers. None of them were quite right. And eventually I found my original swatch. And that has led me to gather up all of my swatches for sweaters that I've knit. And if I have leftover yarn, like a partial ball, to gather those up and keep those all together in a separate place in my office, so that if I do need repairs, I can do that. So I was really happy that I found this yarn, and I was going to use it to do some repairs and then make some changes, like in the neck. And one of the things I noticed is, because this has been in a bin of other swatches and I dug through it, you know, over the course of 15 years, it was a little fuzzier on the surface than my actual sweater is. And so I was like, oh, I hope this is going to look good with the repairs. As I was doing a huge amount of reorganization, not just in my office this week, but also in other places in the house, one of the things that I was reorganizing was this big walk-in closet we have near our front door. We call it the family closet. We've got all our coats, all the boots, hats, games, puzzles, light bulbs, vacuum cleaner, all that kind of stuff stored in there. Right next to the door, it was a big bag full of worsted weight leftovers. I used to take those to my old knitting group, because there was a woman who was always knitting little teddy bears for the Mother Bear Project, which makes bears for AIDS orphans in Africa. And so periodically I would end up with tons and tons of little balls of worsted weight yarn that wasn't really enough to do anything with. And so I would just put them all in a bag, and then I would bring them to her. Well, the last time I did that, I never saw her again. It's been sitting, I calculated when the last time I probably saw her was. It was when my youngest daughter graduated from high school, which was 7 years ago. So I found this bag and I thought, oh, I wonder if some of that red yarn is in there. And look what I found. I found a ball of the original yarn used to knit that Aran sweater, which means I can keep my record of my swatching record for this sweater, and I don't have to undo it and think maybe the yarn's a little bit more worn than the rest of the sweater would look. And so I can preserve this, but I also have some yarn here. So when I redo my neck, I don't have to reuse that yarn. I can start with new yarn. So I'm very happy. And then in addition, after I repair the very thin spots in the elbow, I'm going to put on the suede elbow patches. So I will update you guys on this process when I finally actually do it. But I wanted to give you an update on that because I was very excited. I have this room in the basement that I've always called the craft room, and it was the original location where I brought all my craft supplies and thought I can just store it all there, and when I want to do something I can go into that room and I can find yarn, or I can keep my sewing machine set up and I can just go there and sew. I have some knitting machines in there that I have stored in there, and I also have a serger that I bought in the last few years when I was really kind of actively sewing. My daughter was in figure skating, and so I thought it would be potentially save quite a bit of money to make some of her figure skating outfits. Like if there was something in particular special for like a synchronized skating event, we'd have to, buy that outfit. But I thought that at least some of the costumes or some of the things I might be able to make. And so I bought a serger. Because it's stretch fabric, and I really kind of need that. When I was clearing things out of this craft room, there was a countertop where I had this package of little items, and I don't know what they go to. It could be something to do with the serger, but I don't know what. Or it could have something to do with a knitting machine. Again, I don't know what. Included in this particular package is this really unusual needle. It's called, I don't know if you can you see what that looks like? I have no idea what this is. And I would love it if one of you could clue me in as to which piece of equipment this might belong to. So the second question I have for you guys is if you would be interested in a live stream on short rows. I did one about a year ago, and it didn't go well because of some technical difficulties. Like the equipment I was using at the time really wasn't suitable for doing live streaming. And so the plans that I had for how I was going to demonstrate and illustrate how short rows work just didn't go well. And I've been thinking about doing it again because I wasn't happy with how it went last year, but also because some of the comments I've been getting on some of my videos recently makes me think that there are some huge gaps in understanding about short rows. People aren't aware of the wide range of uses for them, and they're not aware of the different techniques that can be used to produce short rows. So that is something that I was thinking about doing. I have a whole playlist on all kinds of short rows that you might be interested in, and I will link obviously to that down below. But those are all sort of separate units, and I thought it might be useful to give kind of an overview on short rows and some examples of how short rows can be used, and then answer questions. I may not be able to answer every single question that you guys have, but I certainly would like to give it a go. But if that's something that you guys are interested in, I'd like to try to plan for that sometime in the next few weeks to 1 month, depending on how the rest of my life is going. So please let me know down in the comments if that is something that you'd be interested in. And if you're not necessarily interested in short rows, or even if you are, if there is a particular type of live stream video that you would like to see me do, I'd be really interested. I'm always happy to do general Q&A live streams if that's something, and I don't know how often you guys would want something to do something like that, but I would like to do live stream videos more often than I've been doing. I've just been doing them whenever sort of on a whim. A lot of times I'm not even announcing it, I just go live. So I would like to come up with some sort of planned live streams, and maybe if there's some specific topics that you guys would like to hear me talk about, that would be a great starting point, and we could announce them and you could prepare your questions and you would know what time it was going to be, etc., etc. So let me know down in the comments. So I have been working on this office on and off for about 4 months. In the past couple of weeks, I really, really wanted to get it set up completely. And I realized I'm going to continue to tweak. Even today, I was like, oh, this should be here. This should be here. So I'm really excited about organizing and reorganizing now because everything has clicked with me in terms of what I need. And so there have been a few YouTube channels and just me thinking about myself that have really helped me. One was Karen Brown's Just Get It Done Quilts YouTube channel. She did a series on organizing your sewing space, and she had one video devoted specifically to sewing in small spaces where you might have to take things out and then put them back away, which is what I needed for this room. And that was very helpful, as well as here's how you need to set up your sewing space in terms of having a work triangle, and these are the stations that you need. I was like, that was a revelation. And so knowing those things helped me figure out a number of storage and setup solutions. And then the second thing, somebody else was telling me that they stored their fabric using comic book cardboard, which I didn't know what they were talking about. And I looked it up and I'm like, oh, that is actually a really great idea. So that was very helpful. And then last weekend, somebody told me about a YouTube channel called Clutterbug and these different sort of organizational styles. And so I went to her channel and I looked at a bunch of different videos, and I finally figured out that who I thought I was at first is not really who I am. I'm not a butterfly. I'm actually a bee. And the way she's got 4 insects, and the way she divides them up is you either prefer to see your things or you prefer to hide them away. And that she admits there's a spectrum, and you could need different things or want different things in different rooms or different spaces, especially when it comes to shared spaces. Things can be different. But in general, you like to see things, you like to hide things. I know I need to see things. I know, because out of sight, out of mind, I will forget I own it. My husband is very different. He remembers everything he has and he knows where he put it. So I'll say, oh, I need to go to the hardware store to get Sunset. She's like, oh, we have one of those. I'm like, we do? Like, where would we have even put it? And he like wanders off and he comes back, here it is. So that's very different. And then the other is how you like to organize. Do you like macro organization or micro organization? So do you like it really easy to put away? So you just have a bin, everything that's of that type of thing you put in? Or do you like micro organization, which makes things easier to find? And that is what I need. I need to be able to see the things that I can see. And if something gets put away, I need it to be easy to find. Like when I look back, we've been together for I think 28 years now. When I first moved into this house with all of my kitchen equipment and silverware and everything, I'm like, where's the silverware drawer? He's like, right there. I open it up. All of the silverware is just in the drawer. He would empty the dishwasher, just empty the silverware tray in there. And I looked at that and I was like, what? Why don't you have like dividers? And he's like, because if I need a fork, I know a fork is in here. And I was like, no, we have to have dividers. He'll use the dividers. He just doesn't think that they're necessary. But I alphabetize my spice drawer because I need to know that they don't have to be, the A's just have to be together. The B's, generally they have to be in the right thing so that I can find what I'm looking for. So I realized that for me, easy to put away is knowing where it goes. And so that was a very helpful thing to understand. And it's also very helpful to understand that my husband and I was like completely opposite in terms of organizational abilities and styles. But knowing that now about each other, like looking back, things make so much more sense. So one of the things that I also realized about myself by really thinking about things this week is that I have a very finely honed selective attention. I am able to filter out distractions very easily. Like if I'm reading, my hearing turns off. If I'm focused on a task or a person, that's what I'm focused on, and I don't notice other things. So when I enter a room, I don't notice all of the detail of stuff. I notice how I feel in this room, emotionally and physically. That's what I notice. So I'm very sort of internally focused and not so much externally. I've always known I'm kind of oblivious to what's going on, but I didn't have a way to articulate what that means, and it's selective attention. And that is why I have a high tolerance for clutter, because it's not in my way. Unless it's in the way of what it is I'm actually trying to do, it doesn't bother me. It's only when it starts to push in on me and I can't do what I need to do, then I'll go through and I'll put things away. Once I realize that I really need to know where's a logical place to put this, and logical for me means things have to have context. Like if you look at my books up here, I have things kind of grouped together in context. They're not grouped by color or book size or author or title. It's conceptual. So I have like Fair Isle, so things to do with stranded color work, which is a lot of mittens. And then mittens of Latvia, Estonian knitting, which is a lot of stockings. And then I get into my sock books. And so it just kind of transitions, but it's not specific. But everything's context. And what I realized was that when I put things away, like on my desk, I get to the point, I always think, I get about 80% and it's clean enough and I can continue on. And what I realized was because the rest of what's remaining is stuff that I don't know what to do with, because I can't figure out how to put it away in a context that I will remember it. And so I think, well, if I leave it on my desk, that will be that visual reminder I need, but it gets covered up with other stuff that I can then put away. But it keeps coming down to the stuff that I don't know what to do with. And if I just found a place for it, I would forget about it, might as well throw it away. But because it gets covered up, I don't see it and I still forget about it. When I rediscover it, I'm like, I do want to keep this. And so that's been a struggle for me. It's like if I take a really great class from somebody, like on twined knitting. I took a class years ago from Beth Brown Reisel, and I wanted to keep, I found the handouts recently and I wanted to keep them. But again, if I filed them in a file cabinet, I would never look for them there. I would never remember they were there. So there was no point in me putting it in a filing cabinet. And so I sat there thinking like, what do I need to do with it? And I realized, well, I have my library set up in a way that makes sense to me. I can get a binder, a 3-ring binder, and I can put those handouts in there, and I can put a label on the outside of the box, however many labels I need that say what's in there, so that when I come back to this shelf every time, I'll see that. Or if I come over where I know my twined knitting book is, I'll see that binder that says twined knitting on it. And just that exposure to those visual clues over and over will make me remember, oh, I have that handout on twined knitting, and I'll go look for it here. So that was what I realized I needed context. And so when I'm struggling to put something away, it's because I haven't found the context, and that is what I need to look for. And to think about it in those, specifically those terms. So that made this huge difference for me. And I was reorganizing drawers and closets and all kinds of things because I finally understood what it was I needed. And then because I know what my husband's good at, I would have like, we need to keep this. I don't know where to put it. I don't know, nothing makes sense to me. So I'm going to put it here, and you are going to remember that we have it and where it is. So, just so we can work together as a team. So having said that, and realizing that the way I've set up my office may be the exact opposite of how you'd want to set something up. I have this very selective attention, and I have the need to see things, and primary importance to me is function. I don't mind things looking aesthetically nice, but that can't be the point. So what I'm going to do is take you on a tour of the office and point out what the function is of each area, and why I have it set up this way. So some of you are going to hate this, and some of you are going to love it, I'm sure. So this is my office as you walk in the door, and you can see that what I have here on this red carpet, this is the carpet that took up the entire floor space, available floor space in my old office. So you can see that I have plenty other floor space now. So I have my studio lights. I have a tripod that has a teleprompter ability on it. And then you can see that I have that backdrop that you will see when I do Casual Fridays. And up here at the top, you can see it looks like the function is just to be decorative. That's the third function. Number one was I had single skeins all stacked on a cube in a shelf, and I couldn't tell what colors I had when they were all crammed together. So I thought I'd hang them up, and so I hung them up in rainbow order because that seemed like that would make sense. But in this room is so much bigger than the other room, and so I get quite an echo from the hard walls. And so that functions as some sound dampening as well. Then in this corner over here, let me come over. That thing at the bottom is to store one of the lights if I needed to. So I have a dress form right here that I can pull out. I have a large tote bag, a large tote bag full of other large tote bags if I need to go out somewhere and carry a lot of things. I don't need to do that very often, so having this stored in this place is convenient. It's not on the floor, it's not taking up closet space, it's not taking up shelf space, and it fits. And then you can see on the bottom I have a little bin there. That little bin I use upside down to hold my laptop on if I'm doing a Zoom call, which I'd be doing at my table. And inside there is a spare coffee cup warmer. So I have one at my desk, but it's a real pain to try to unplug it. And this is an old one. And so I can just sit there with my coffee, and it's right close to where I'm sitting. So back here, I have bins of yarn and also samples and swatches. I've got labels on them because this is organized differently than my old office. I'm still trying to learn where things are. And I am going to have to do some additional sorting. This bin at the very bottom right there was swatches I need to sort. And I went through and I sorted them. So they're in different baggies with labels on them. That is still like, it's too hard for me because I will, in order to know what's in there, it would be really hard. So that's going to get separated out once I can figure out how to subcategorize all of those different things. And so I have all of my things like sock forms and heads and mini mannequins and all that kind of stuff is up there. So then we come over here and I've got some storage. That has got some empty binders that I'm going to be using, as I said, to file on my bookcase when I put different types of handouts in. I've got some sewing books there. And this right here is my vintage sewing kits, the extra ones I'm not using, but this is my next project I've got swatches for. I just want to keep reminding myself that I want to work on that. So here I have a little mini station for doing steam blocking. Like if I have some swatches I'm going to be doing a technique video on, I don't want to wash and block and wait it for it to dry, I might do a steam. I keep extra batteries in here for my mic and stuff like that. It's like a proximity thing. The thing that I need to use with this needs to be stored there. Here is my circular needle storage. I used to have it up there and it wasn't quite convenient enough, and I kept thinking about putting it here, and I thought that's going to be terrible because it's hanging down lower. So what I decided to do was to go ahead and set up the second set of hooks and see what I thought. And what I realized was that I can't see these numbers. These numbers I need when I'm putting them away so I know which category they go into. And you notice I need to see it and it needs to be out, but it has to be organized. And some people are going to look at that and go, oh my God, it's so messy, I can't stand it. And they would rather put all of their needles away. This is an example of how I need micro organization, but I need to be able to see it. And so I'll collect 5, 6 different needles off my desk and I'll just come in here and put them all away at one time. But the beauty of this is that when I'm sitting here, I need, a size 6 needle. My signature needles are color-coded, and all I have to do is look in my hands. Oh, is the green needle here? And I can just pull it out without getting up out of my seat. So I decided I love this location. And I decided to hang my Nitty Notty up there because I had been looking for a place to put it. So I have my Swift and ball winder, my scale, which I use pretty often, are right within reach, or all I have to do is take a step away. Worsted weight yarn that's for my next sweater projects. This is all worsted weight sweater quantities. Notions, I can never remember which notions are in which drawer, so I put a bunch of labels on them. My books, again, by category. These are general reference, some my favorite stitch dictionaries, some design. And then over here are other stitch dictionary, other design books. And they're just sort of put there. Although I have the 2 Japanese stitch dictionary books together, and I have these 3 books on Bavarian traveling twisted stitch patterns, and these 3 booklets are also Bavarian traveling stitch patterns, 2 Barbara Walker books. So I have some things together, some not. My other Barbara Walker books are right here. I use them all the time. So, it makes sense to me based on proximity and what I need to use them for. In my desk, so again, here's my coffee warmer. So I've got crochet hooks, emery board. I've got DPNs, pencils, markers. I got a notions bag, Kleenex, little scrap papers. I love writing lists. And then down here, I have on the right yarn for Technique Tuesday swatches. So I can just bend over and pull it out. And then I have a bin for my work in progress. Over here is like office supply type of things. And again, I had to put labels of every single thing because I didn't know what some of the stuff was. I opened it up and what is that? Oh, it's emery boards. So I have a filing cabinet with stuff. You know, it was one of these things I opened up and I'm like, oh, I didn't know I'd put these in here. These are weights to sort of set my scale, their known weight. And, you know, these are all accessories to do with the scale. So I thought, oh, I'll put them in a little bin. So that's me. These things all get grouped together. And then other office, you know, envelopes, folders. And then this is a wall of yarn that's different yarn weights that I don't use very often. So if I need something that's bulky weight, so this is available. And then at the top of is sock yarn, which I use all the time, which is, so it's pretty close proximity to me, that sock yarn. And then above, I have those blocking squares like I had over on top of that little cabinet. And then I have this, which I bought years ago that I use to block. It's for quilters. It's an ironing pad for quilters. It's huge and rectangular, but it has a grid on it. And so I use it when I need to block things to a certain size. So here is the closet. This is a big closet. This opening is 6 feet wide and then it extends all the way down into the corner. So it's 8 feet long. So this is the closet, how I have it set up. And what I've decided to do is on the left is sewing related stuff and on the right is spinning related stuff. I originally had all of this spinning stuff, like this stuff here, all the way in the back of the corner, which makes it really kind of hard to access. And I realized at this point, I still have plenty of room in the closet that it makes sense to make this more accessible and put it on this shelf. So what I have in here is very important to have in your office. Little spinning tools and also a little project I got from Paradise Fibers last year. They sent me, it's like a little kit I want to make sure that I use. So I have like parts for my wheel, more parts for my wheel. I've got a raw fleece up there. I've got some more raw fleece down there. In this corner, that's my spinning wheel, and I have a spinning chair. I love this chair. And then here is a folding table. It's exactly like that folding table. It's adjustable. It can be at 24 inches, 29 inches, or 34 inches. So it can be up and down at different heights. So this is exactly the same, and it can be used for like my drum carding, or I can sit at it for sewing. I could use it as a cutting table. And then over here I have my sewing. So this is my sewing cart that I realized I didn't have to have the sewing machine in its case all the time. I could put it on here. I've got the pedals for this sewing machine, and then I have a serger. I wasn't initially I wasn't going to bring it up, but I decided I might as well. And then the other things in the cart are like the sewing machine feet, things I need when I'm sewing, like sewing needles, thread, and then in this bin right here, the work in progress. I found down in that downstairs room a pair of pajamas that, or pajama bottoms that I had sewn and just need to be hemmed. So, so I have that in there, and that will be the first thing that I finish up. I have an iron. I have cutting board or cutting mat right there. I don't have many patterns. I had a lot of patterns for my kids that, you know, obviously they're grown up. So I only have a couple of things that I thought, well, I'm going to keep. This is going to evolve as I accumulate patterns. So I have some fabric. I have some sort of plain knit fabric that I was using to try to figure out some garment construction. I've got a lot of muslin. I've got fleece, some cotton, and some flannel. So I don't have a lot of fabric. I'm not a stasher, just like I'm not a stasher for yarn. I found these towels downstairs that I had originally bought to make gifts where you make a hooded towel. So I thought I'm gonna go ahead and make those, and then I'll get rid of those out of here. One of the things that when I was looking for sewing tables and things like that was that there's a folding craft table that could be used as a cutting table, a bigger cutting table than my folding table. And when it folds up, it would fit in this space. So I do have room to add another table if I need to. This stuff on the ground here, that's a drum card. This is for spinning. That's a drum carder in there. And the yoga blocks are for if I have my table set at a higher height for sewing, I can use my spinning stool and be seated up higher, but then I can raise my feet up as well. And the final thing is this wall right here, which you can see that what this is a curtain wire that has furniture blankets hanging from it. And that again is to reduce echo. But one of the things I loved about the potential for this room was that there would be a blank wall that I could hang my knitting art. And so I wanted to make sure that I didn't just put acoustic tiles or something up there. So I can open these up. So on this wall, and they're probably crooked, which is probably going to drive you some people, but these are pieces of art that I wanted to hang. This is a piece of art that I bought when I was in Greece back in 1985, I think. When I was living in London, I took a holiday. And I still have some space, and I want to hang pictures of my grandmother knitting and my third great grandmother knitting in these spaces. I'm going to get some prints made so that I can hang those up. And I want to do something to like a curtain tie type of thing so I can keep this more open when I'm not recording. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.